On Thursday, April 3rd at 2:17 in the afternoon, I pulled into my own driveway at 614 Birchwood Lane and found that my garage door remote no longer worked. I pressed it 3 times. Nothing. I got out of the car and tried the keypad on the side panel, the one I'd used every single day for 19 years. 4 digits. My anniversary. Wrong code, the screen said. Wrong code. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't pound on the garage door until someone came. I stood in my own driveway in the April cold, holding a bag of groceries from Kroger, and I thought, so this is how they decided to do it. Let me back up. My name is Carol Ann Whitfield. I'm 67 years old. I retired 3 years ago after 29 years as a registered nurse at St. Lyot, Luke's Medical Center in Columbus, Ohio. I've changed IV lines in the middle of the night, held the hands of people taking their last breaths, talked families through the worst moments of their lives. I know what it looks like when someone is trying to stay calm because panic won't help anybody. That's what I did in my driveway. I stayed calm. And I started thinking, my husband Franklin passed in August of 2021, pancreatic cancer. We had 4 months from diagnosis to the end, and we used every single day of them. Franklin was 71 years old, a civil engineer who'd spent 35 years designing bridges across the state of Ohio. He used to say the secret to a good bridge was knowing exactly where the weight would fall. Plan for the pressure points. Everything else takes care of itself. He didn't get to plan for this one. We'd bought the house on Birchwood Lane in 2004, the year our son Kyle graduated high school. Franklin had picked it for the workshop in the backyard, a separate little building with good lighting, and a workbench that ran the full length of the south wall. He spent his weekends out there making furniture, a rocking chair for my mother, bookshelves for Kyle's first apartment, a jewelry box with a carved lid for our granddaughter when she was born. That workshop was the last place Franklin went on his own 2 feet before we had to get the hospital bed set up in the living room. After he died, I kept everything exactly as he'd left it, his tools hanging on the pegboard, his half-finished side table still sitting on the workbench, his reading glasses folded next to the plans he'd sketched out in pencil on a yellow legal pad. I went out there sometimes in the morning with my coffee and just sat, not doing anything, just being in a place that still smelled like him. For 2.5 years, I lived alone in that house. It was quiet in ways I hadn't expected, but I learned to fill the quiet with things that mattered. I joined a book club at the library on Morse Road. I started volunteering at the hospital 2 days a week, not as a nurse anymore, just as a visitor for patients who didn't have anyone coming to see them. I grew tomatoes in the backyard and gave most of them away to the neighbors. I was doing fine, not perfect, but fine. Then last February, my son Kyle called on a Sunday evening. Kyle is 39 years old. He works in corporate sales, travels a lot, talks fast, always sounds like he's rushing to the next thing even when he's sitting still. He got that from Franklin's side. The Whitfield men were always building something, always moving toward the next project. "Mum," he said, "I need to ask you something and I need you to hear me out before you answer." I turned down the television. "Go ahead. Natalie and I are having a hard time financially. Her design firm lost 2 major clients, and my territory got restructured at work. We're not in crisis, but we're close." He paused. "We were wondering if we could stay with you for a while. 3 months, maybe 4, just until we get back on our feet." I thought about saying not right now. I had my routines, my rhythms, the particular piece of a house where I made all the decisions. But he was my son, and he'd never asked me for anything like this before. Not once in 39 years. "Of course," I said. "Come home." They arrived on a Saturday in early March with a moving truck I hadn't expected. Kyle had mentioned a few suitcases. What pulled up to my house was a 16-foot truck, a car trailer behind Natalie's Audi, and a separate delivery van for what Natalie called her office equipment. Natalie is 36. She has a design firm, or had one. Interior spaces, she calls it. She walks through rooms the way some people read, menus, cataloguing everything, deciding what stays and what needs to go. The first time Kyle brought her home for Thanksgiving 6 years ago, she'd asked me if I'd ever considered taking down the wallpaper in the dining room. It's very 1990s, she'd said, smiling. I'd smiled back and told her Franklin had hung that wallpaper the summer we moved in. She'd said, "Oh, how sweet." When they moved in, she walked through every room with a clipboard. Not a phone. An actual clipboard with a printed form on it. She said she was doing an inventory for insurance purposes in case anything got damaged during the move. I said, fine. I watched her write things down about my furniture. The first week, small adjustments. Franklin's rocking chair, the one he'd made for my mother and I'd kept after she passed, got moved from the living room to the back porch without anyone asking. Natalie said it was a traffic flow issue. I brought it back inside. The second week she asked about the workshop. Kyle had mentioned it, she said. She was using the guest room as her office right now, but it wasn't ideal for client calls. The lighting was wrong. She thought the workshop might work better. She'd keep Franklin's things exactly as they were, just in one corner, and she could set up her desk by the window. I stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at her. That workshop was Franklin's space, I said. I'm not ready to change it. Of course, she said. I completely understand. I just thought since it's sitting empty. It's not empty, I said. It's his. She nodded and dropped it. For 2 weeks, she dropped it. Then Kyle came to me on a Tuesday evening. Mom, Natalie really needs a proper workspace. You know how it is when you're trying to run a business. She's not asking to take it over. Just borrow the space. She'll keep Dad's stuff safe. I said I'd think about it. I didn't say yes. But I made the mistake of not saying no clearly enough. By that weekend, Natalie's monitor and printer were on the workbench, pushed to one side. Franklin's yellow legal pad had been folded and tucked under the half-finished side table. His reading glasses were gone. I found them later in a coffee mug on the windowsill, handles up like they were a pencil holder. I put them back on the workbench where they belonged. The next morning they were in the coffee mug again. The money conversation started in March. We were all three at the kitchen table, which had started to feel less like my kitchen table and more like a conference room Natalie was renting from me. She said they wanted to be fair about the utilities, the groceries, the general upkeep. She'd been looking at the property tax statements, which she found in the kitchen drawer where I keep household paperwork, and she had some thoughts. I asked her when she'd been in that drawer. She said she was just trying to help. I said, those are my documents, Natalie. She said she understood completely, and she was just being proactive because the property taxes on a house this size, in this zip code, was significant for a person on a fixed income. She said that phrase, fixed income, the way people say it to mean something small and brittle. I'd been a nurse for 29 years. I had a pension. I had Franklin's life insurance. I had savings. I was not fragile. I'm managing fine, I said. She said she was sure I was. She was just thinking about the future. Had I thought about whether this house was the right long-term fit? Some of her clients had downsized into really beautiful communities, active adult communities she called them, where you have everything you need and you don't have to worry about maintenance. Kyle was looking at his phone while she said this. He looked up when I didn't answer. Mum, she's just being practical. I changed the subject, but that night I lay in my bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about the way she'd said long-term fit. Like I was a piece of furniture, she was deciding whether to reupholster or replace. My best friend Dorothy called on a Wednesday in late March. Dorothy and I met in 1991 when we were both working night shifts on the cardiac floor. We've been through everything together. 2 of her kids, my Franklin, her first husband who turned out not to be worth keeping. She lives in Dayton now, 75 miles away. She was crying when she called. Her voice was thin and stretched. My brother Eddie passed this morning, she said. Oh, Dorothy. Oh, honey. I was just with him on Sunday. He seemed okay. He seemed like himself. She couldn't get the words out for a minute. When she did, she asked if I could come. Just for a few days. She had her daughter flying in from Portland, but not until Friday, and she didn't want to be alone Thursday night. I'm coming, I told her. I'll be there tonight. I told Kyle and Natalie at dinner. My friend's brother just died. I'm going to Dayton Thursday morning, and I'll be back Sunday afternoon. Natalie said to take all the time I needed. She said it with that careful, specific warmth that I'd learned didn't always mean what it sounded like. Kyle said he'd take care of everything. Don't worry about a thing, Mum. I packed a bag that evening. Sensible things. Clothes for 3 days, my medications, my phone charger, the casserole dish I was planning to fill at Dorothy's. I left a note on the kitchen counter with my phone number and Dorothy's address. Back Sunday by 2 p.m. There's lasagna in the freezer. I left at 7:30 Thursday morning. As I turned out of the driveway, I looked in the rearview mirror. Natalie was standing at the front window with her coffee. She raised one hand. Just a small wave. I waved back and kept driving. I should have understood what that wave meant. But I was thinking about Dorothy. 3 days in Dayton. I helped Dorothy call the funeral home, helped her sort through what Eddie would have wanted, sat with her when the crying came in waves, and there was nothing to do but stay. Her daughter arrived Friday, and the 3 of us cooked together and told stories about people we'd loved and lost. On Sunday morning, Dorothy looked steadier, some colour back in her face, the particular stillness that comes after grief starts to settle. You should go home, she said. You've done enough. I hugged her for a long time, called her twice from the road, pulled onto Birchwood Lane at 2008 Sunday afternoon, 8 minutes later than I'd said. The house looked the same. I pulled into the driveway and pressed the garage remote. Nothing. I pressed it again. Tried the keypad. Wrong code. I sat in my car for a moment, windows down, April air coming through. I could hear the neighbour's dog 2 houses over. A cardinal in the oak tree at the edge of the yard. Everything ordinary. Everything the same. Except the garage wouldn't open. I went to the front door instead. My key went in and stopped, wouldn't turn, wouldn't catch. I tried again. Nothing. I went around to the back door, same. I knocked, 3 solid knocks. No answer. Kyle's Jeep was in the driveway. Natalie's Audi was there too. The television in the living room was on. I could hear it through the glass. I knocked again, harder. Nothing moved inside except the flicker of the TV. I went back to my car. My hands weren't shaking, but they wanted to. I focused on keeping them still. I called Kyle. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I tried Natalie. It rang once, then stopped, like the call had been declined. I sat in my own driveway, in my own car, locked out of my own house while my son and his wife watched television inside. I opened my email on my phone, old habit from years of checking shift updates at the hospital. There was one new message I didn't recognize at first, from Franklin's bank. Our joint account that I'd never closed because closing it had felt too final. Subject line, account access notification. A secondary account holder had attempted to update the mailing address on record. Attempted and been flagged for verification. The attempt was logged at 11:43 Thursday morning. Thursday. The morning I left for Dayton. I sat with that information for a very long time. I texted Kyle, I'm in the driveway. The locks have been changed. I can't get into my house. 3 minutes passed. Then, oh, no, Mum. We had a break-in scare on Friday night. I was going to call you, but I didn't want to worry you. I'll get you a new key tomorrow. A break-in scare. On the same day, someone tried to change the mailing address on a bank account they weren't supposed to be accessing. I didn't write back. The afternoon turned. I wasn't going to leave. I want to be clear about that because the question people always ask is, why didn't you just go to a hotel? Just go to a friend's house? Just drive away? I understand why they ask, but this was my house. The house Franklin and I had chosen together, had paid for together, had filled with 19 years of our life together. My name was on the deed, only my name, because Franklin had insisted on putting it in my name alone when he updated his estate planning in 2019. He'd read something in the news about a woman who lost her home after her husband died, and there were complications with joint ownership. That's not going to happen to you, he'd said. Sign here. I was not leaving my house. I drove around the block and parked in front of the Hendersons' place. They snowbird in Arizona from November through May, they wouldn't mind. I could still see my front door from there. At 4:45, Natalie came out onto the front porch in workout clothes. She had a mug in her hands, a blue ceramic mug with a white handle. I recognized it immediately because I'd had it for 15 years. Franklin gave it to me for Mother's Day in 2010. Best Mum, it said in his handwriting, because he'd had it personalized at a pottery place downtown. She stood on the porch, sipping from my mug, looking out at the street, not searching, not concerned, surveying, like someone who's just moved into a new apartment and is getting comfortable on the balcony. Then she went back inside. That look was a full education. At 6 I was hungry. There was a gas station 4 blocks away, a Sunoco on Cleveland Avenue. I drove there, used the restroom, bought a granola bar and a bottle of water. The kid behind the counter, maybe 19, looked at me the way young people look at older women who seem slightly out of place. You doing okay, Mom? Long day, I said. He nodded. There's a McDonald's on 5th if you need something hot. Thank you, baby. I drove back and ate the granola bar, watching my front windows. Kyle texted again at 7:15. Mum, where are you? Getting worried. I thought about what to write. I thought about writing I'm 2 blocks away eating a granola bar in my car while your wife uses my coffee mug on my front porch. Instead, I wrote nothing. I turned my phone face down on the passenger seat. Night came. Temperature dropped to 41 degrees. I had a throw blanket in the back seat, the one I kept for cold waiting rooms at the hospital, and I pulled it around my shoulders. My lower back started aching around 900. My knees joined in by 1000. I am 67 years old and I was sleeping in a car, and it was not comfortable, and I will not pretend it was. But I did not leave. At 1:30 in the morning I drove to the 24-hour Walgreens on Broad Street, used their restroom, bought a small coffee from the machine by the pharmacy counter. The woman working the night shift, maybe my age, grey braids pinned up under a Walgreens visor, glanced at me when I came in with my blanket still draped over one arm. She didn't ask questions. She just said, "The coffee machine is freshest if you press regular, not bold." I pressed regular. It came out hot and decent. I took it to the little bench near the blood pressure machine and sat. She came over on her break and sat nearby. We didn't talk about anything important. The weather. Her granddaughter's birthday coming up. How the night shifts at Walgreens weren't as bad as people thought. Actually quieter, more time to think. She said, "You need anything else before you go?" I said no. "Thank you for letting me sit a while." She said, Any time. I went back to my car, parked on Birchwood again, sat in the dark with my coffee cooling in my hands, and started thinking the way nurses think, which is to say clearly and in sequence, even when everything feels like it's coming apart. They had tried to change the bank mailing address. Natalie had been looking through my household documents. She'd been making notes about the property taxes. She'd asked very specific questions about what long-term fit meant for a woman my age. And 2 days after I left, every lock on my house had been changed. This wasn't spontaneous. This was planned. I thought about Franklin. I thought about what he would say. He'd said something to me once, the year his own mother was getting older, and his brother was making noise about power of attorney. He'd said, "Caro, when somebody starts asking what's yours before you're gone, that's not love. That's inventory." I understood inventory now. At 5:30 the sky went from black to grey. My house was still there, still mine. The lights came on in the kitchen at 6:15. I could see movement. Natalie, probably, with her morning routine, her smoothies and her supplements and her precise way of occupying whatever space she was in. At 6:45 I called Eugene Pratt. Eugene had been Franklin's closest friend from their engineering days. They'd worked together at the county for 12 years before Eugene started his own contracting business. He'd been a pallbearer at Franklin's funeral. He'd called me every month since, just to check in, just to say hello, just to be the kind of man who keeps his word to people who are gone. The phone rang twice. Carl Ann. It's early. Eugene, I need a favor. I need the locks on my house changed this morning. All of them. A pause. Long enough that I knew he understood there was more to it. You at the house? I'm close by. I'll be there in 45 minutes. Eugene, I should tell you there are people inside who might. He stopped me. Carol Ann. Franklin was my brother in everything that counts. If you're calling me at 6:45 in the morning about your locks, I don't need anything explained. I'll be there in 45 minutes. He hung up. I drove back to my house and pulled into the driveway. I parked next to Kyle's Jeep like I had every right to be there. Because I did. Eugene arrived at 7:32 in a white pickup with Pratt Contracting on the side. He walked up to me slowly, a big man, 73 years old now, with white hair at his temples, and Franklin's favourite kind of handshake, the kind that means I see you. He looked at the house, looked at me. They changed your locks while you were gone. Thursday. I found out yesterday. His jaw went tight. He didn't ask who. He went to work. It took him 28 minutes to change every lock on the house. He did the front door, the back door, the garage keypad, the side workshop door. He explained what he was installing as he worked. Quickset Smart Key, he said, can be rekeyed without a locksmith if you ever need to. And I'm putting a reinforced strike plate on the front because I don't like these hinges. Your house deserves better hardware. At 1804, he handed me 3 keys. You want more copies? 2 is enough. He waved away the money I tried to hand him. Don't insult me. He squeezed my shoulder the way Franklin used to. You call me if you need anything at all. You hear me? He drove away in the morning light. I stood on my porch. I put the key in the lock. It turned clean and smooth. The deadbolt clicked and the door opened and I walked into my house. The smell was wrong. Not bad exactly, but not mine. Some kind of reed diffuser with a name like Coastal Linen or Fresh Rain. 3 of them placed around the living room. My family photos on the hallway wall were still there, but they'd been redistributed, spread out, some taken down to make room for a large framed print in a white mat that said something in Italian about light and beauty. My mother's rocking chair was on the back porch with a tarp over it. Franklin's armchair was still in the living room but angled differently. like something in a showroom. The house remembered me anyway. The floor still creaked in the same spot near the closet. The light through the kitchen window still hit the white tile at the angle I'd loved for 19 years. I went to the master bedroom, my bedroom. My side of the closet had 2 of Natalie's blazers hanging in it. My things had been shifted to the left, compressed to make room. The nightstand that used to hold my book and my reading glasses had a charging station for Natalie's devices on it, and my book on the floor underneath. On the chair in the corner sat a plastic tote labelled Carol, Misc Items. Inside my extra reading glasses, the small framed photo of Franklin and me at the Grand Canyon in 2007, the book my colleague gave me when I retired, and my grandmother's rosary that I kept by the bed every night. Packed up, labelled, moved aside. I carried that tote to the kitchen table and set it down carefully. Then I started gathering. I didn't rush. I didn't break anything. I folded every item of clothing. I zipped every bag. I collected chargers and face creams and Natalie's fabric swatches and her clipboard and Kyle's dress shoes and his work laptop and every object that belonged to them and not to me. I was methodical. I was thorough. I had spent 29 years as a nurse, and I knew how to work precisely under pressure. It took me an hour and 50 minutes. At 9:57 in the morning, I carried the last bag out to the front lawn. I lined everything up along the path from the porch to the driveway, organized, deliberate, impossible to mistake for an accident. I went back inside. I made coffee, real coffee in my own pot, and I sat down at the kitchen table with the Columbus Dispatch app open on my phone, reading the morning news. At 10:22 I heard the garage door trying to work, the keypad beeping with the old code, then the front door, the handle moving, then knocking. Carol. Natalie's voice sharp and confused. Carol, something's wrong with the lock. I finished my paragraph. Set my phone down, walked to the door, opened it. Natalie was standing on the porch in her exercise clothes, hair pulled back, a look on her face I hadn't seen before. Not the careful, practiced warmth, something unguarded. Behind her, Kyle was coming up the walk, looking at the bags on the lawn. What is this? He wasn't asking, really. He was trying to understand what he was seeing. I looked at my daughter-in-law, then at my son. I said I changed the locks on my house. You can't, Natalie started. We live here. You stay here, I said. Those aren't the same thing. Kyle reached the porch. Mom, what's going on? Where were you last night? I pulled out my phone. I showed him the email from the bank. Account access notification. Secondary holder attempted address change. Thursday, 11:43 a.m., the morning I left. His face did something complicated. Mum, I can explain that. Natalie thought it would be easier to consolidate the mail, and I kept going. I opened my email to the screenshot I'd taken in the Walgreens parking lot at 2 in the morning. I'd logged into my own email and found 3 messages in a folder I hadn't created. A folder labelled House, since from a draft chain Natalie had forwarded to my account by accident 3 weeks ago when she'd been trying to forward to Kyle. I'd never opened them. I hadn't known they were there. At 2 in the morning, in a Walgreens parking lot, I opened them. The first was from a real estate attorney Natalie had contacted in February. She'd asked hypothetically about the process for establishing legal residence and caregiver rights in a property when an elderly homeowner has diminishing capacity. I said that out loud. Diminishing capacity. I'm 67 years old. I drove myself to Dayton and back. I held a grieving woman's hand for 3 days, and I helped her make every phone call she needed to make. My capacity is fine. The second email was from a facility called Willow Creek Senior Living. A tour had been scheduled for April 10th. 1 week from now. I looked at Kyle when I read that one. He looked at the porch floor, the The third was from Natalie to Kyle, sent in March. Subject line, timeline. The message said, if we can establish 90 days of residence with utilities in our name, combined with a documented conversation with her doctor about independence concerns, we have a much stronger position when we approach her about transitioning out. Transitioning out. I had taken care of people my whole adult life. I had sat with families while doctors explained what transitioning out meant. I knew that phrase in all its forms. I knew it in this one too. You weren't in a financial crisis, I said. Or maybe you were. But that wasn't why you came here. Kyle's voice came out small. Madison wanted. Natalie, I said. Her name is Natalie. He rubbed his hand over his face. Natalie thought that if we could get established here, we could help you transition to a smaller place. Something easier to manage. And this house, Mom. And this house, Kyle. He didn't answer. This house has my name on the deed, I said. Only my name. Your father put it that way on purpose. He did that for me, and I think some part of you knows why he did it. I worked for 29 years at St. Luke's. I have earned everything I own. I was not confused. I was not diminished. I was in Dayton helping my friend bury her brother, while the two of you were scheduling tours of senior living facilities and trying to get mail rerouted. Natalie had gone quiet, in a way that looked like she was recalculating. You have until 11, I said. That's 45 minutes. Everything on that lawn needs to go into your car. After that you're trespassing and I'll call the police, and I'll have a very clear story to tell them with documentation. You can't do this, Natalie said. Her voice had an edge in it I hadn't heard before, something beneath the warmth. We have nowhere to go. I thought about that granola bar in my cold car. I thought about the Walgreens bench and the woman with the grey braids and the coffee machine. I thought about sleeping with a throw blanket over my shoulders while my son watched television 40 feet away. You'll figure it out, I said. I did. I went inside and left them to it. They loaded the car in 38 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. Natalie was efficient, I'll give her that. She didn't slam things, she packs them. Kyle moved slower. At one point, he stopped in the middle of the walk and looked at the house, and then at me through the kitchen window. I didn't look away. At 10:58, the Audi backed out of the driveway. Kyle didn't look back. I stood at the kitchen window until the street was quiet again. Then I walked through every room, slowly, the way I used to do a room check at the end of a shift. Everything accounted for. Everything in its place or soon to be returned to it. I went to the workshop first. I moved Natalie's monitor and printer to the porch. I took Franklin's legal pad from where it had been folded under the side table and smoothed it flat on the workbench. I found his reading glasses in that coffee mug and set them next to the plans, just the way they'd been. I stood in the middle of that workshop and took a long breath, and it still smelled like sawdust and the 3-in-1 oil Franklin used on his tools, and something that was just him, just whatever a person leaves behind in a space they loved. I let myself cry in there, not for Kyle, not for what had been attempted, for Franklin, who had planned carefully and loved quietly and made sure I would have somewhere to stand when the weight fell. He'd known about the pressure points. I brought my mother's rocking chair back inside, moved Franklin's armchair back to its angle, took down the Italian art print and put the hallway photos back where they belonged, pulled out 3 reed diffusers and opened the windows instead. My phone rang. Dorothy. Carol, I've been thinking about you. Are you okay? I sat down in Franklin's chair. I told her everything. I told her about the driveway, the remotes that didn't work, the email from the bank, the night in the car, Eugene and his truck, and the quick-set smart key locks with the reinforced strike plate. I told her about the Walgreens bench and the woman with the grey braids. I told her about Willow Creek Senior Living and the email about the timeline. Dorothy was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Franklin is somewhere right now feeling very smug about that deed." I laughed. Actually laughed. The first real one in days. He really is. What are you going to do? I looked around my kitchen, my table, my window, my morning light on my white tile. "First, I'm going to make a real breakfast," I said. "Then I'm going to call an attorney." "Good," she said. "In that order?" "Absolutely, in that order." I made eggs and toast and orange juice and ate at my kitchen table with the windows open and the April air coming through, the smell of my neighbour's lilac bush drifting in from down the block. Then I called Patricia Osei. Patricia Osei was an elder law attorney I'd heard about through a colleague at the hospital, a social worker named Francis, who dealt with exactly these situations more than anyone should have to. Francis had given me Patricia's card 2 years ago, after a patient's family tried to contest his estate while he was still in his hospital bed. "Just keep it," Francis had said. "You never know." I'd kept it in my junk drawer for 2 years. I found it that Monday morning next to a rubber band and a take-out menu from a Thai place that had closed. Patricia Osei's office was on High Street, 4th floor, overlooking the stretch of Columbus that used to be warehouses and was now coffee shops and law firms. She was in her mid-50s, Nigerian-American, with natural hair, and the specific manner of someone who has spent many years listening to people tell her things that make her quietly angry on their behalf. She read the emails I'd printed. She looked at the bank notification. She set everything down and folded her hands. "Mrs. Whitfield, this is elder financial abuse. It may not have completed, but the intent and the preparation are documented. You're in a much better position than most people who sit in this chair. What do I need to do?" She laid it out. The deed was already in my name alone, which was the most important thing. She would draft a letter of notice to Kyle and Natalie, documenting the attempted financial interference, which created a formal record. She would update my will to reflect clearly that inheritance was not automatic and was contingent on demonstrated respect and relationship. She would update my power of attorney documents, removing Kyle and naming Dorothy as primary agent. She would connect me with a geriatric care specialist for a cognitive assessment, not because I needed one, but because having one on record with today's date would preempt any future claim about my capacity. "And," she said, "I want you to install a security camera at your front door, not because you're in danger now, because you should always have been able to see who is standing on your porch." I hadn't thought of that. I said so. "Most people don't," she said, "until they do." I left her office 2 hours later feeling lighter than I had in weeks. For 3 weeks I didn't hear from Kyle. I was glad of it. I needed to remember what my own house sounded like when I was the only one in it. I needed to cook my Sunday pot roast without worrying about disrupting anyone's preferences. I needed to turn on the gospel station at 7 in the morning and sing along badly while I made my coffee. I went back to the hospital volunteer program. I went back to book club. I started going to the community garden on Thursdays with a woman from church named Loretta, who knew everything there was to know about overwintering vegetable beds and whose opinions on tomato varieties were genuinely fascinating. The security camera went up on a Tuesday. Eugene installed it. He also added a motion sensor light and fixed a window latch in the spare room that had been loose for 2 years. He stayed for dinner afterward, and we talked about Franklin for 3 hours, and it was the best evening I'd had in longer than I could say. The first call from Kyle came on a Sunday, 3 weeks after the Audi pulled out of the driveway. I let it go to voicemail. "Mum, it's me. I know you probably don't want to hear from me right now, and I understand that. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I know that's not enough, but I'm sorry." I listened to it twice, put the phone in my pocket and went back to my garden. The second call came 2 weeks later. "Mom, Natalie and I are separating. She moved back to Cincinnati. I'm not telling you that because I want sympathy. I'm telling you because I think I owe you honesty. She'd been planning this before we ever called you. Not the separation, the other thing. The house. She'd been researching it for months. I found documents on her laptop. I didn't know the extent of it. I knew things weren't right. I should have stopped it. I didn't, and that's on me. I sat with that for a long time. Knowing and not stopping is its own kind of choice. He called again in December. He didn't leave a voicemail that time. Just called, let it ring, called again. On the third try, I picked up. "Hi," I said. "Mum." He exhaled. "Hi." We talked for 40 minutes. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't resolved, but it was real. He told me he'd been seeing a therapist. He told me he'd been thinking about what Franklin had been like as a father, the patience of it, the consistency, the way Franklin had always shown up for what he said he'd show up for. "Dad would be ashamed of me," he said. "Your father loved you," I said, "but he also believed in accountability. Both things can be true. What can I do?" I thought about that. I said, "Keep calling. Keep being honest. Don't tell me who you're trying to be. Show me." He said, "Okay." He's been calling every week since. We don't always have long conversations. Sometimes it's 10 minutes about nothing. But he calls when he says he'll call. That's not nothing. In February he drove up from Cincinnati where he'd found an apartment. He asked if he could look at the workshop, see the side table his dad had been making. I said yes. We stood in the workshop together for a while, not saying much. He picked up the legal pad, looked at the pencil plans, set it back down carefully. He touched the edge of the unfinished table. Did he know what it was going to be? He asked. He had sketches for a few options, I said. He hadn't decided. Kyle nodded. Could I finish it? I don't know if I have the skill, but I could try. I looked at my son for a long time. I thought about Franklin designing bridges, about knowing where the weight would fall. Use his tools, I said, and take your time. He came back 3 weekends in a row. The side table is still not finished, but he's learning. He brings coffee and we sit in the workshop while he works, and sometimes we talk and sometimes we don't, and both kinds of silence are starting to feel okay. I don't know where we end up. Some things that break don't go back together the same way, but I know this house is mine. I know my name is on the deed, and the locks are Quickset Smart Key, and the camera on my front porch records everything, and I have a drawer with Patricia Osei's card in it, and an attorney who knows my name. And I know that Franklin was right. About all of it. About the deed. About the weight. About where the pressure falls, and what holds when it does. I stood on my porch last Sunday in the early morning, coffee in hand, watching the neighborhood wake up. Loretta was walking her dog on the far side of the street, and she waved. The cardinal was back in the oak tree. The lilac was starting to bloom early, ahead of itself. The way things sometimes are when spring comes sudden. My house. My porch. My morning. I went inside, locked the door behind me and started breakfast. People ask me sometimes if I think I was too hard on Kyle. Too fast, too final. And I understand why they ask, because he's my son, and I love him, and love is supposed to be soft. But here's what I've come to understand, not from a book, not from anyone telling me what to think, just from living long enough to see how things actually work. What you allow is what continues. That's not a punishment. That's just how life operates. When I made myself small in my own house, when I moved quietly around Natalie's preferences and let Franklin's reading glasses end up in a coffee mug and said nothing, I wasn't keeping the peace. I was teaching them that the peace belonged to them, not to me. I was handing over something that was never mine to give. The night I sat in my car in the dark outside my own home, eating a granola bar with a throw blanket over my shoulders. I wasn't a victim. I was a woman who had spent years saying it's fine when it wasn't, and the bill had finally come due. I don't say that to be cruel to myself. I say it because it's true, and because the truth is the only thing that actually helps. What saved me wasn't luck. It was the slow accumulation of choices I had made over a lifetime. Franklin put that house in my name because he was a man who thought carefully about where the weight would fall. I kept Eugene's number because good people are worth keeping. I held on to Patricia Osei's card in a junk drawer for 2 years because Francis told me to, and I trusted Francis. None of that was an accident. That was a life built with intention, and when the pressure came, the structure held. I think about that a lot when I look at Kyle now. He is trying to become someone who builds things instead of taking what's already built. That's what he said when he asked to finish his father's side table, and I believed him, not because I needed to, but because I've watched him show up 3 weekends in a row with coffee and his father's tools, and a willingness to do the slow, patient work of learning something hard. Character isn't declared, it's demonstrated. I learned that from Franklin. I'm watching Kyle learn it now. As for Natalie, I don't spend much time thinking about her, not out of bitterness, just because she is not my lesson to carry. She made choices and she is living with them, the same as all of us do. What I want anyone to take from this, if they take anything at all, is something simple. You are not obligated to make yourself smaller so that someone else can feel larger. You are not selfish for having a name on a deed and intending to stay in the house it belongs to. Getting older does not make your life negotiable. Your history, your home, your judgment, none of that expires. The locks got changed twice on 614 Birchwood Lane. The first time by people who thought they could rewrite who owned it. The second time by me. The second time was the one that counted.